Hello, F2 Fan 5000 here with my post-season F2 analysis. Going to start with driver rankings, going from bottom to top, and I'm going to rank 23 drivers. So that's the initial 22 that competed in the first 10 rounds up to Monza. Plus, I've also included Lawrence Van Hoopen because he's done 3 race weekends with the same team. And let's get started. The rating is an average of all the ratings that I give them during the year. So I went back, watched all the old videos, and saw what rating I gave it, put it in a table, averaged them out, and the rating isn't exactly, the guy that wins gets a higher rating, the guy in second gets less, the guy in third gets less, so on. I always balance against expectations and who the team they're driving for, etc. So, if Rafael Villagomez gets a podium, he's getting at least an 8, whereas Richard Verschoor getting, a podium, say third place, well, I might give him a 6 or a 7 because I expect more from Richard Verschoor than I do from Rafael Villagomez. This sort of thing. Or, Arvid Lindblad, I'm thinking, well, he's the youngest driver there, younger than most of the F3 drivers, so I have to consider that Arvid Lindblad, if I see him on the podium, or having a good race, I have to take that into consideration, and I punish mistakes more than poor performance. Now let's get started. Amaury Cordeel, 23rd, he gets 2.3 out of 10. A 4th season driver. Obviously no one's ever rated Amaury Cordeel particularly highly, but he's still lacking pace and he's made plenty of mistakes. You would expect that for me, a good season for Amaury Cordeel, at least battling for minor points paying positions, qualifying at least inside the top 15, and he's absolutely failed to do that. Bare minimum I would expect of a 4th season driver, well in his 20s. So 2.3 out of 10. Max Esterson is in 22nd place. He gets a 2.4 out of 10. I know Triton are the worst team in F2, but it is a spec series, so if you have a good race it would show, and I have not seen much in the way of good races from Max Esterson at all. When the car was there, it was Sami Megatunov making the most of it. But, remember Trident last year, Richard Verschoor was able to do with the Trident car in 2024, but these two drivers have shown that they're absolutely out of depth. So in 21st place is Sami Megatunov. He gets a 2.6 out of 10. And so while he was generally faster and more impressive than Max Esterson, Megatunov has had several bad races. He's caused a dreadful accident at the Red Bull Ring at Spielberg, a dreadful accident. He's had a lot of poor races where he was anonymous, crashed out in the only race in Australia, and had a most awful, almost embarrassing, I would say definitely embarrassing race in the Monza feature, where he's just spinning around in the grass on the inside of turn 1, or the outside turn 1, inside of turn 2 there, what do they call it, the Rettifilio. And that was, I would call that career-ending race. So 2.6 out of 10 for Sami Megatunov. And 20th place we have Kush Miney, a third season driver in his mid-20s. I expected more, and he's usually running around at the back. And even if we want to blame the car, I can't blame the car for the constant running off the circuit, the mistakes. There weren't that many crashes, but there's a lot of little incidents on the part of Kush Miney. And I'm looking here, out of 14 race weekends, I gave him a score higher than a 5 out of 10 pass mark only 3 times. And I've given him 3 0 out of 10s and 3 1 out of 10s. So that just tells you everything about how uninspiring Kush Miney was in 2025. In 19th place with a rating of 3.5, I have Oliver Goethe. Oliver Goethe has been finishing in the top 10 of the F3 Championship in 2023 and 2024. I think he was quite impressive in 2024 when he was very consistent and finished almost every race in the points and was a distant outside bet for the championship going into Monza, but he didn't race there. He raced in F2 instead. And then this year he looked completely out of his depth most of the time. He wasn't particularly slow, although sometimes he was, but sometimes he was very error prone. And I think Monza was the worst race weekend for him. Just messy driving and a fair few 1 out of 10s. But there he ended the season well, looking very fast and taking the pole position at Qatar and finishing 5th in both races at Abu Dhabi. So there's a bright spot there. I've given him a strong mark for Hungary. I think he scored points in Hungary as well. But there's not much to say about Goethe. Very disappointing, I would say. He should have been in the top 10 somewhere like, Bogdanovic, Montoya, at least fighting inside the top 10 regularly, finishing in the top 10 of the championship. And he was far from that. Very disappointing season from Oliver Goethe. And in 18th place, I've got Lawrence Van Hoopen. I felt he was quite slow at Baku, and I thought this guy could be another Megatunov or another Esterson, but he sort of got up to their pace in the feature races of Qatar and Abu Dhabi. He got there without doing pre-season, so he's got a pass mark, in fact, for Abu Dhabi, just because he's already in the pack and Triton is struggling. Though the weak spot, of course, was Qatar when he's out-qualified by Wharton, and then he crashes into Wharton in one of the races, which is pretty embarrassing. But I think that was a sprint race, and in the feature race, he's been on the pace of the other drivers as well in Lusail as well as in Abu Dhabi. So let's see. But he gets a 3.6. And then in 17th place, I've got Ratomo Miata. He gets a 3.7 for his season. Very difficult year. ART are not in a good spot, but he's always struggling. He's very hard for him to make an impact, especially in qualifying. The one really bright spot was his weekend in Belgium, where after disqualifications he got a podium. But the actual 4th place that he got on the road, to me, is still an excellent result, an excellent turnaround. Fantastic from Ratomo Miata. But otherwise, pretty absent. He scored the odd point here and there. I think he had a good weekend at Barcelona as well. So that's to his credit. And he's got a good team at High Tech next year, so hopefully he can turn things around. In 16th place, I got Chian Shields. Now, I know Shields didn't score any points, and some of the drivers I've put behind him have scored points, but I don't have any expectation of Chian Shields. his reputation is something like, not much better than Niels Coulin, but he's been consistently faster than a Niels Coulin would have been, and he's sometimes been holding on to the back of the pack or finishing ahead of other drivers, not very often. But he had a couple of really bad race weekends, especially towards the end of the year, crashing under the safety car in Monza. I also feel as though he could have done more to avoid Alex Dunn's car in Abu Dhabi. Other than that, he generally stayed out of trouble, but he's a bit slow. His highest ratings were at Silverstone in Belgium when he kept the car on the road in difficult conditions. 15th place, I got Victor Martins with a 3.9 out of 10. And Victor Martins is another terrible season, honestly. The bright spot obviously was Lusail, Qatar, where he won the feature race. He showed a lot of pace in qualifying and is the fastest qualifier. In the races he's gone missing, and sometimes you can chalk that up to ART having the wrong setup on the car, but he's also been involved in a lot of incidents. I'll point to Albert Park, where he crashed the car, all of his own accord, as well as Silverstone, where he's crashed in the final few laps, taking unnecessary risks, throwing away points. And in 14th place, with a rating of 4.3, I have John Bennett. And I think he's lucky to be that high up, but he's generally stayed out of trouble, very few crashes, though I don't remember now what happened in Jeddah, but I've given him a -1 for that. Must have been a poor weekend. Generally, he's had a lot of 3s and 4s and 5s, generally anonymous, but nothing terrible from John Bennett. And then 13th place, I have Gabriele Mini with a rating of 4.8 out of 10. Very up and down season, mostly down, I would say. He's had a few incident-filled weekends, especially at Silverstone, but he finished on a high in Abu Dhabi. But the expectation for Gabriele Mini is a lot higher than this after he's finished second in F3, second in Formula Regional European Championship, and he's an Italian F4 champion. That was pretty disappointing from Gabriele Mini, and he's gotten beat by his teammate. But there were bright spots, as I said. In 12th place, I got Dino Beganovic. He's probably very disappointed with the campaign, and he's moving to Dams for next year. There were times this year where he showed a lot of pace, and especially in the last third of the year, times where he looked like the fastest driver out there. So perhaps a lot of it could be chalked up to setup issues in the first half of the year. His weak spot was Monaco. Unnecessary crash, completely unnecessary. Also in Barcelona, he's been anonymous, but he's been excellent. Baku, Lusail and Abu Dhabi is fantastic as well. So strong into the season. Hopefully he carries that into next year. And 11th place, I've got Richard Verschoor. And I think Richard Verschoor he could have done a lot more. It wasn't meant to rhyme. You see, he started the season fairly well, consistently getting on the podium. And in the second half of the year, he's made a big crash, had a big crash at Monza in the qualifying. And in the races, and he's generally been out-qualified by Oliver Goethe, his less experienced teammate, who's been struggling, and that's not a good look. So I don't know where Verschoor disappeared to in the second half of the season. But yeah, in the first half of the season, there's 2 10 out of 10s, a 9 out of 10, a couple of 7s, a couple of 5s, and then in the second half of the year, there's 3 1 out of 10s at Abu Dhabi, where he had no pace. Monza and Belgium have He's also got a 1 out of 10. Yeah, absolutely anonymous weekend. So this is what I mean. You think about what Richard Verschoor did in Belgium. He gets a 1 out of 10. If Cian Shields did that, I'd probably give him a 7 out of 10. Or an 8 out of 10, because you can't expect Cian Shields with his skill level to be able to pull off a weekend like that when you're not last and you're not crashing. But this, Richard Verschoor, I expect a lot more from him. And in 10th place, I've got Pepe Marti. A bit of an up and down season, but there were some bright spots. The weak point for him was Monaco, as well as Baku. I've got him. I think, Baku, because, he crashed into Martinius Stenson there. And Monaco, probably he got a poor qualifying. But outside of that, he's pretty good without being excellent. He's got a few sprint race wins. And in Monza, which is the highlight of his season, in my opinion, he gets a feature race podium. Finally, he obviously had one back in Bahrain in 2024, but in this year, that was his first feature race podium, and it was good to get that out of the way before he left the series. In 9th place, I've got Sebastian Montoya. So for me, Sebastian Montoya we had no expectation on him coming into the year. He's always been a midfielder in F3, and then suddenly he's about a third the way through the season, he's driving fantastically at Imola, at Barcelona, at Monaco, Silverstone. He's getting podiums at left, right and centre. He's absolutely demolishing Gabriele-Mini. And then Belgium happens, and he's one of the very few drivers that weekend to crash. And then he's pretty anonymous again, and then he gets another podium, I think, in Qatar. He drives very well in Qatar. Probably not a podium, but he got good points. I think he got a sprint race podium. I should have watched the races before doing this, but who's got the time? But anyway, Sebastian Montoya ended the season well, and about the third the way through the season, he was fantastic, and then in about 2/3 the way through, he's been lost. And very hard, actually. Montoya showed a lot of pace in the Prema that neither of the Behrman, Antonelli or Mini have shown in the last 2 years. He showed pace in the Prema that we didn't expect to see, but only intermittently. And he's in the top 10 in my driver rankings. And in 8th place comes Rafael Villagomez. He also gets a 5.9. He's exceeded all expectations. Rafael Villagomez is supposed to be, what can I say, some of the worst drivers that have come along in the last 5 to 10 years. He's not supposed to be much better than Cian Shields. Well, he's got 2 podiums, and he got 4th in the feature race at Monza. He has exceeded all expectations. Obviously, you wouldn't put him down for a world championship, and I can't see him finishing in the top 10 of the F2 championship anytime soon. But compared to his reputation, he's not bad. He's consistently scoring points, and he's actually demolished his teammate John Bennett, who again he's not a championship level driver as John Bennett, but he's far away from the likes of Alessio Deletta or Mahavi Raghunathan. Those drivers, he's a lot more talented than them. His CV is a lot more strong, and he's just been demolished by Rafael Villagomez. So to me, that speaks highly of how Villagomez has done. And in 7th place, a driver that finished the season well, Joshua Dirksen. with an average rating of 6.1. And despite a strong start to the season with a sprint race finish, he's had a difficult period, especially at Monaco when he's hit the wall, causing an unnecessary incident. That's his worst race. And there was disappointment generally at that middle third of the year. From Belgium onward, he sort of looked a lot stronger, culminating in a few podiums, as well as a feature race win for the second year running in Abu Dhabi. And I gave him 11 out of 10. I had to, because he was on the podium in the sprint race as well. So fabulous from Joshua Dirksen. It seems about getting that car in the right window, and they seemed, I know on maybe certain tracks they struggle, I don't know. Dirksen is a bit of a mystery, I must say. And sixth place with a rating of 6.2, I have Roman Stanek. Stanek moved from the Trident team to the much more competitive Invicta team, and he showed in the second half of the year what he was capable of. He had a quiet first half of the year. His best races were Belgium and Hungaroring, where I think he's been the best driver that weekend, though it's hard to say, because it looked as though when I'm watching that race that he's sort of helped Fornaroli win the race, but that might just be how it looks, and it may not be that way, but he definitely put in a fantastic lap. He's also looked very strong at Abu Dhabi. Yeah, but it took him about half a season to really fire up, and he was very strong when he did, but he also had some mistakes, and sometimes he lacked feature race pace. That was evident in Losail, and also in Baku qualifying. He's just made a big mistake and smashed into another car in qualifying, so that counts against him. And then fifth place, I got Luke Browning with a rating of 6.4, and he's had a very good year. It's consistently been there or thereabouts until the Baku sprint race, and after that his season fell off a cliff. He had no pace in the Baku feature race, and he was woeful at both Qatar and Abu Dhabi. And he's also had a bad weekend at Barcelona. He's had a couple of 9 out of 10s, and he got 10 out of 10 for his sensational weekend at Monza. Alex Dunn also gets a 6.4. For me, he's more up and down than Luke Browning. I've broken protocol. He got a 11 out of 10 for Imola. He got 15 out of 10 for Belgium. That was one of the best drives I've ever seen by any F2 driver in any era that I can remember. He dominated qualifying, by 4/10 to the nearest driver there, which is bigger than the gap between the two McLarens and the third fastest driver in Formula One. And this is a spec series, so for him to have that gap was amazing. And then in the feature race, he was sensational as well. And it's an absolute discredit to Formula 2 that they found a way to take that win away from Alex Dunn. What let him down was obviously Monaco, but to me it's more after Belgium, he's lost momentum, and the only good weekend he's had is at Losail. That's what really let him down. So he's gone from having 8 and 9 and 10 out of 10. Yeah, he also got 10 in Bahrain, but he's got a 0. That was the worst way he could possibly finish the season, just crashing his car into Victor Martins for absolutely no reason whatsoever. So it's very up and down for Alex Dunn. Hopefully he learns his lessons. But of course we like that fire from Alex Dunn. There's something special, particularly in the Monaco qualifying where he smashes Via Gomez in the wall, and he says over the radio, well, he's holding me up. I have to get past him. So not those exact words, but that was like that fire from Alex Dunn. That's what we want to see from these drivers. And then in third, with a rating of 6.7 out of 10 is Jack Crawford. And he's had a very hard to define season. He's got a couple of 10 out of 10s for his wins at Silverstone and Baku. And on the other end, he's been, had some dreadful weekends, especially in Belgium and Qatar, where he just had no pace whatsoever. And that's what cost him the championship. But he's generally been a very strong driver. Second place, I have Leonardo Fornaroli with a rating of 7.0, which means in first place it's Arvid Lindblad with a rating of 7.1. I do want to quantify that I disagree with that because I've made a mistake with the ratings looking back. I gave Fornaroli a 3 out of 10 at Barcelona, but looking back at the weekend, whatever happened was not his fault. I think he deserves a 5, not a 3, because he's qualified in the top 10 and he's fighting for a podium in the sprint race, and the safety car doesn't help him. In the feature race, everything went wrong, but it wasn't his fault. It was the team stuffed up on from some protocol. He gets a 10-second stop and go penalty, and then in the race his car breaks down. So giving him a 3 for that is not correct. And as for Arvid Lindblad, I've also given him a 3 for Red Bull Ring, whereas that should be a 0 because he caused a nasty accident with Oliver Goethe. So actually it should be the other way around, but I'm not going to argue with it. Or let's just talk about Fornaroli quickly. He's operated at a very high standard without quite reaching the level that I expect to give him a 10 out of 10, but he's gotten 7, 8, 9, 6, 6.5, a lot. Only at Barcelona, as I said, he got a 3, but the only race weekend where he genuinely deserved a 3 was at Abu Dhabi. That was the worst weekend from him. Very poor. Now, coming to Arvid Lindblad, I think he exceeded my expectations. I know other people thought he was going to run away with the title, 2025 F2 Wheatfield, Arvid Lindblad, champion of the future. The people with the bells and whistles love saying stuff like that, but I never saw it. I saw that Arvid Lindblad is being rushed up the junior ladder. The expectations that he would win were unreasonable, but he's shown, for someone that young, he's shown a lot of pace, a lot of skill, and he's absolutely obliterated Pepe Marti. The only reason they were close in the points, and I know Pepe was ahead, is because of penalties. So let's go through some of the races, like Belgium, for example. Belgium, Arvid drove fantastic. Now, he's had a tyre pressure problem, and they've taken the 18 points away for the second place. Now, that's not fair because there's nothing Arvid could do to affect the tyre pressures. That's a mistake by the team. But instead, Arvid he's the one paying the price, not the team. Where also in Monaco, he gets a penalty, and somewhere else he got a penalty. And but yeah, he had dreadful weekends in Red Bull. I gave him a 3. It should have been a 0. That was a nasty accident he caused with Goethe. And in Monza, he got a 0. And, he finished second in the sprint race. But, yeah, the feature race was pretty dreadful, where he just went into the back of Alex Dunn. Though, it's just one of those things. It's just a lack of experience in that situation to follow closely behind Alex Dunn. So maybe that's not really, like, how bad is it? Fornaroli did the same thing at Baku, but he sort of got away with it, whereas Arvid Lindblad didn't. And then what made Lindblad look worse is that he had a damaged car, and Campos didn't call him into the pits. They left him out. To me, that was shocking. And it looked so bad when he speared Roman Stanek out of the race. It was so unnecessary, but it's really on the team. I think outside of those two races, he's had some fantastic drives. At Baku, he qualified very poorly, and he's come through the field to finish in the top 6. And he finished 4th in Qatar. He's pitted for soft tyres halfway through the race. He was absolutely sensational in Abu Dhabi, a champion's drive, if you ask me. It was only the safety car that's put him out of contention for that race, being on the podium, possibly winning. Where else? Belgium, he was fantastic. Silverstone, Hungary, all right. Barcelona, fantastic. Monaco, yeah, excellent drive to the podium. Of course, they took that away from him. Imola, he was strong. Jeddah, Bahrain, all good races. So there's very few poor races from Arvid Lindblad. A lot of strong ones, and people's expectations are a bit too high. Third full season of car racing. Back in 2022 or 21, Richard Verschoor is in F2, Kush Miney, Martins, they're in F3, and Lindblad was still in karting. So, the experience level is very different. But I think if I had it again, I think that Leonardo Fornaroli should actually be on the top, because he's the driver that made the least mistakes, and he sort of delivered under pressure. And I gave him a 10 out of 10 at Qatar. I gave him an 8 out of 10 for his race, but I gave him an extra 2 points because, the way he carried himself and handled himself, even though he's under the pressure driving for the championship, no mistakes whatsoever. Even in the qualifying session, you just go back and watch it, Jack Crawford, mistakes. Other drivers' mistakes. Leonardo Fornaroli, I think he dipped one tyre in the wheel, one wheel in the gravel, but that's a very minor mistake, and he'd already put his fast lap in, so it wasn't, maybe could have gone quicker, I don't know. But anyway, the thing is that if you look at the qualifying sessions in the races, Fornaroli's the one that's always maximised his lot in qualifying, and in the races he's always avoided incidents. And I think the kicker for me is Monte Carlo, because I think he should have won that race, and when he's going into the first corner, he's 3rd or 4th, and he's already predicting that Dunn and Martins are going to come together, and he's positioning his car so he doesn't get caught up in it. To me, that's just a next level, thinking. He's a real thinker. He can think his way through races and get a good result. So that's a fantastic skill to have. So this screen tells us, this is a table, and it's basically how I envision the championship and the points would have been if we do 2 things. Firstly, we go back and we reverse penalties, because the penalties distort the picture of where the drivers are truly at. And the second thing, it also tries to average out the effect of the safety car. So, for example, in Imola, where it says R2, and the points aren't as they usually are, Dino Beganovic has got 22.5, Alex Dunn's got 18.5, etc. It takes the final result of the feature race and averages it out if the points were given before the safety car, and taking into consideration pit stops as well. Fornaroli still wins by about 3 points, or 34 points over Alex Dunn, but there's a tight battle between Dunn in 2nd and Luke Browning in 6th for 2nd in the championship. So Dunn has obviously lost a lot of points, and I've restored his points, and so we should go through it, the actual races. So I know that in Australia, here's another silly thing, right? Gabriele Mini qualified on pole for the Australian F2 race, and he's supposed to get points for that, and he never did because they gave him a 3-place grid drop for blocking someone in qualifying. Well, okay, you block someone in qualifying, but why give the point to Victor Martins, right? Victor Martins didn't set the fastest time. Gabriele Mini did. In Bahrain, this is the sort of thing, and I think the same thing happened in Qatar, where they took the point for fastest, points for pole, I should say, took it from Goethe, who did set the fastest time, and they gave it to Fornaroli. So, to me, that's I think I've made a mistake here because trying to figure out where those points have gone for Qatar. But anyway, it doesn't really matter. Okay, it's only 2 points. It doesn't really change the outcome. So the first race that I know that there's a change, as I mentioned, is in Imola, because there's a safety car, and before the safety car, Dino Beganovic is leading the race. Fornaroli is second, and who was third? I think it was Browning, and I think Dunn was in 5th place, or Crawford, or someone lost. And anyway, the safety car bunched the field up, and then the pit stops happen and they come out in a different order. So I've tried to sort of average it out. And then in Monaco, I've given full points because the thing is, the Monaco feature race was shortened, and at the end of the day, that's not the fault of the driver winning the race. They're essentially being punished for someone else's mistake, and that's no good in my opinion. That's they're being punished because Alex Dunn had a crash with Victor Martins. They're being punished because Beganovic crashed, and that's not their fault, right? That's why. So why give them half points for that race? And of course, I've reversed the effect of the safety car. Barcelona in the sprint race, I've taken the final result and averaged it out with the standings before the safety car. In Red Bull, the feature race, I've reinstated Alex Dunn. At Silverstone, I don't think there's much change. Belgium, I've reinstated Alex Dunn and Arvid Lindblad. Plus, there's other smaller positions where, a penalty has been applied and I've taken that away. But these are the main things. And then, where else? In Baku, in the set, there was also a safety car in Baku which changed the order. And in Qatar, the sprint race, the safety car changed things a little bit, not too much. Mostly it was Roman Stanek that lost out because of a strange pit stop. And I think also in the Abu Dhabi feature race, Lindblad probably would have won the feature race if was it not for the safety car. Jack Crawford would have been second. Maybe Dirksen would have been third. And maybe Fornaroli's 4th or 5th, or someone like Stanek or Beganovic would have been 4th. Who knows? But the point is that it was changed because of the safety car. So I've averaged it out, and so they're the final results. Fornaroli, then Alex Dunn in second. So he's basically missed out on a super license because of the penalties that have been applied. They've dropped him from 2nd to 5th in the championship. Jack Crawford's 3rd. And then Arvid Lindblad is actually up to 4th. And don't forget, he's lost a lot of points through penalties. And most of the penalties aren't his fault, especially at Belgium, where he's lost 18 points. Then Richard Verschoor is 5th. Luke Browning is 6th. And Beganovic is 7th. So he rescued his season decently. He started off pretty poorly, but then the last 4 rounds or so he's had a lot of pace. Pepe Marty, Dirksen, Stanek, and the rest. Yeah, and just a brief mention for Nikola Solov, did well coming in at the last 2 rounds, but I don't want to talk about him too much because he's only there for 2 rounds. But while he was there, he was fast. He out-qualified Lindblad, though his race pace wasn't quite there. I'm only going to have a brief look at the data. I think I'll just explain this data is the first row is qualifying, as it says. Now everything is because the overall fastest driver is Alex Dunn. Everything is relative to him. So when it says minus, like it says in the top left-hand corner, you see next to Leonardo Fornaroli, where it says qualifying, it says minus 0.023. That means he's 0.023 of a second faster than Alex Dunn in qualifying. And you can see the gaps there. The fastest qualifier is Martins. He's 1/1000th of a second faster than Fornaroli. Then it's Dunn, and then Stanek is in fourth, and the other drivers are way behind, and the driver that's a long way behind everyone is Chance Shields. He's even a second behind someone like Sami Megatunov, almost a second slower than Villa Gomez. So that's where we're at. With the qualifying, with the sprint race pace, the fastest driver in the sprint races was Richard Verschoor, and followed by Pepe Marty, Arvid Lindblad, Joshua Dirksen, and then Fornaroli. But in the feature races, Alex Dunn is by far the fastest driver, and he has almost 0.2 of a second on Leonardo Fornaroli per lap. This is all per lap, right? So every lap he's averaged about 0.2 on Fornaroli, and then Fornaroli is 0.2 faster than the next fastest driver in feature race pace, which to my surprise is Victor Martins. And then it's a lot closer after that with Marty, Lindblad, Browning, all there, and Jack Crawford and Dino Beganovic are about half a second off. So this is interesting. If you look at this, you can see that in feature race pace and qualifying pace, Beganovic is not that far behind Browning, but in the overall standings, it looks like they're a big gap between them. But I don't really know how to read that, because I feel as though there was a big gap between them, but maybe in the feature races, Beganovic has been respectable. And Crawford, I think his data here is affected by the fact that he has off weekends such as Belgium and what was the other one? Yeah, Belgium and Qatar. And then the overall race pace there is an average with more weight between sprint race and feature race, with more weighting given to the feature race. But the most interesting column here is ultimate pace, and I think it's the best way to determine who's been good and who hasn't. It's a 5 parts feature race, two parts sprint race, and 3 parts qualifying. So it's a very good overall picture, but gives more weighting to the feature race, as well as more weighting between qualifying rather than the sprint race. And the fastest driver is Alex Dunn, and then 0.088 or 88,000ths of a second slower than him overall is Fornaroli, and third is Victor Martins, and he's a fair way behind both of them. And not far behind him is Arvid Lindblad and Browning and Marty. So these drivers have been quite solid. And then there's Verschoor there in 7th place. and then Jack Crawford. So you get the idea. And the slowest driver is Chance Shields. He's over the whole season, he's 1.8 seconds slower than Alex Dunn every lap. And the second slowest driver is John Bennett. No, I think that's wrong. It should be that. I think it's Esterson. I've made a mistake there. But anyway, so it's Esterson, but he's more than half a second faster than Shields. Then you got, Bennett, Cordell. I think Megatuniff is there somewhere as well. Oh, yeah, Megatuniff, Miney. So these drivers are around a second slower every lap rather than Alex Dunn. And, yeah, you can just see the data there. It's and there's a few more columns in this table which shows you the R minus Q, quali SD and feature race SD. So SD is standard deviation, which means variation, and the R minus Q is the race pace compared with the qualifying pace. And although it doesn't really tell you that much, I think the closer it is to zero is good. Or if it's slightly negative, like it is with Marty and Dunn, it means this driver is probably even faster in the race than they are in the qualifying. Whereas if it's slightly positive, means they're slightly faster in qualifying than they are in the race. And if it's a big positive, for example, Max Esterson is about 3/4 of a second, that means he's 3/4 of a second faster per lap. He's 3/4 of a second faster per lap in qualifying than he is in the race. As for the standard deviation, that's a very good measure of telling you how accurate a driver is, how regularly they are qualifying, in this case qualifying, or in the feature race, their race pace is close to a sort of a potential fastest where they should be. And as you can see, Fornaroli and Dunn are the two standouts. The interesting thing to me is Max Esterson and Sami Megatuniff having very low qualifying standard deviation, which tells me in qualifying these two drivers are probably maximising what they are capable of, which may not be a lot, but whatever they have in their skill, their ability, their skill, they're maximising it. And also both of them have a big number next to their R minus Q. So I think that's telling us that the Trident car is struggling with its race setup. And what else is there? Lindblad, yeah. Whereas you see the opposite of that is the Campos team. You can see that Lindblad is 0.06 of a second slower in race and in qualifying, and Pepe Marti is almost 1/10 of a second faster per lap in the race and in qualifying. So that tells me that Campos has a very good race car. So that's a very good overview. I think it sort of covers everything because I've given the averages for the driver ratings, and to me that removes any what they call recency bias, where I don't really remember how drivers went earlier in the year, but I remembered when I made the video, like the next day, I remembered the race very well. So when I made those ratings, they were very accurate. And just another point, on average, the drivers have averaged a mark of 5 out of 10, 5.0. So it's a very average grid. Doesn't mean it's necessarily a bad grid. A lot of that is, based on, the mistakes. I think looking at this grid, I think there's several drivers that have been well ahead of the field and that are regularly scoring points, particularly Fornaroli, Dunn, Lindblad, Browning, Crawford and Vashaw. These drivers have been doing very well. And then there's a couple of drivers that were inconsistently very fast, such as Montoya, Dirksen and Boganovic and Stanek. And then the rest tended to struggle. Pepe Marti was very good in the sprint races, and then some drivers always struggled, such as Bennett, the two Trident drivers, Miata, Cordeal, Kushmini, Oliver Goethe most of the time. These drivers always struggled. So I think it's... Let's put it this way. If people think... Let's see how Arvid Lindblad goes next year in F1. But if people think he's very good, he hasn't really had a walkover. And Richard Vashaw is a known quantity. And he hasn't had an easy time either. And Arvid Lindblad, he's been, touted as a future potential championship level driver. So, championship winning driver by Helmut Marko. So, he's no slouch, and these drivers haven't had it easy. I don't think Richard Vashaw had an easier time this year than he did last year. And so it's hard to say because even Victor Martins, hasn't really looked any more comfortable against this lot of drivers than the ones last year. Obviously, last year it was a very stacked grid. I think that Gabriel Bortoleto, Isaac Hadjar and Paul Aaron are very, very good drivers that no one saw coming. And, this year I think a lot of the drivers are unknowns, if I'm being honest. They're big unknowns, and unfortunately they might be forgotten very quickly, but I'm obviously going to mention them and analyse what they've done. But there were a few races here that have done poorly. So the average driver rating for the Australian F2 round was 3.7. Victor Martins got a -10, which I think he thoroughly deserved. He drove horribly in the opening laps. Ritomo, Miata, Kushmini, Sami Megatunov and Max Esterson all got a 0. In Bahrain, they get a 5.1 out of 10. Alex Dunn drove fantastically well, whereas some of the others, such as Miney, Cordeal, Miata, were more disappointing. And in Jeddah, there's a 5.2 out of 10. Most of the ratings are fairly decent, but John Bennett gets a -1. And then in Imola, there's a 5.5, so we're trending upwards to this point. And there's quite a few good drives. The weakest person that was Kushmini. He got a 1 out of 10. And Villa Gomez had a bad weekend. I gave him a 2 out of 10. And then things go downhill. Monaco is the low point. The average driver, no, it's not the lowest, it's the second lowest, but an average driver rating of 3.5 out of 10. Dreadful races from Max Esterson, Alex Dunn, Dino Boganovic, Joshua Dirksen, all having horrible weekends, spoiling their reputation with unnecessary crashes. And then in Barcelona, it goes back up to 5.4, spearheaded by a wonderful weekend from Arvid Lindblad, but also Vashaw, Crawford, Dunn, drivers, and Sebastian Montoya. And then we go to the Red Bull Ring, and the standards drop a bit. I think Cordeal, Megatunov, Lindblad are driving pretty poorly. But Alex Dunn and particularly Vashaw and and Fornaroli drove well. And then in the Silverstone, the rating goes up to a 6.3. The drivers generally did well in the wet there. And the rating gets even higher. They average a 7.2. I gave them their flowers because they drove very well in the wet for the most part, except for the driver that stood out for me was Sebastian Montoya. Had a bad weekend. And then Hungary, they averaged a 5.8 out of 10. I haven't given anyone a 0 though. Gabriele Mini gets a 1 out of 10, so did Max Esterson. And then the low point was Monza. The driving standards were very poor. Megatunov and Chien Shields and Oliver Goethe were all very, very bad that weekend. Kushmini, Cordeel. Oh, no, not Kushmini. Kushmini as well. Cordeel, all poor weekends. Lindblad. And then in Baku, they're averaging a 4.7 out of 10. And Cordeel had a bad weekend, and that's his last weekend in Formula 2, I believe. And then in Qatar, there's a few lousy weekends from Kushmini, Crawford, Mini, Miata, but mostly it's pretty good. And in Abu Dhabi, it's a 5.4, with Chien Shields, Alex Dunn and Luke Browning being the standout poor performers, whereas Arvid Lindblad, Joshua Dirksen, Roman Stanek, Oliver Goethe, Jack Crawford, and Dino Bogdanovic all having excellent weekends there. So it's a little bit up and down. The Monza weekend was very poor. I didn't do the driver ratings before this year, so I can't compare. I think, as I said, I think the best driver over the year was Leonardo Fornaroli. Always managed to pull something out of the bag in qualifying, minimise the mistakes and get the championship. Well done to him. And definitely some very exciting races there, although the last two at Qatar and Abu Dhabi were a little bit boring, and Monza was disappointing because of the driving standards, which was a shame because these drivers did very well in the wet in Silverstone and Belgium. Hopefully some of the drivers that stood out this year, such as Crawford, Fornaroli, Browning, for sure, hopefully we see them in the future in a top tier championship.